Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have our public caucus on meeting with our zoning board members, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Gattens, and Mr. McDermott. Thank you for coming and cluing us in on all of your concerns. We did receive a letter from Attorney Benatar with some requests and stuff, so we were aware of some of that. So I'll let you guys get started, and we'll see what we can do.
Good evening, Council, and thank you for having us tonight for a caucus on the zoning issues. Since the new ordinance has come into effect, our last couple of meetings, we've seen some different issues come up, and things that we dealt with in the old ordinance aren't appearing in the new ordinance. I think one of our biggest concerns among the board is the drop down from square footage for units. It doesn't really exist in the book. It's saying a one room basically has to be a 10 by 12 or 120 square foot, and a bathroom is 70 square feet, but it doesn't call out anything after that. Where the old ordinance was a minimum of 600 square feet. And I can speak for myself. My concern is we have a lot of old homes in Scranton with large units in it that an outside developer from outside the area, I'll be specific on it, can take them and make them into 300 square foot apartments and overcrowd a neighborhood. And then if we're looking at the parking aspect of it too, they have to provide off-street parking, which they tend to come and ask for their backyards as parking. So my concern on that issue is more the overcrowding of the neighborhoods that are crowded already, and there's no guideline after that 190 square feet.
And
So
Mr. Gattens,
I think,
and also when it comes to parking, it went from 1.5 spots per unit down to 1. Is that
Yes.
that's correct?
yeah. So that's one issue we have with this. Our first meeting or two, we were blind on it. And I can say that we went by the old ordinance at that point because we didn't know. And back to parking as well, we dropped it down to 1. So again, you're going to have off-street parking with 1, and then go to on-street parking is what's going to happen. And if you're going to congest the neighborhoods with multi-units in them houses, you're going to have a long, hot summer in a lot of areas throughout the city. And a couple other things that have popped up. In the new ordinance, in section R10, R11, and R14, there's no side setbacks, it's 0. So what it's saying is that I could build a house right on the property line. And if you have windows on the side of that house, you're not looking out your window anymore.
What were the setbacks on the old ordinance?
4, I think it was 10.
12 total.
12.
8,
Yeah.
you could do 8 and 4.
Yeah.
Had to be 12 total.
Yeah, but 4, I think 4 is the minimum.
Correct. 4 foot,
So-
8 foot, 6 and 6. It had to be 12 feet total.
Yeah. But as I said, R10, R11, R14, and R10 is a town, city, single-family residential, R11 is a city neighborhood mixed residential, and R14 is a city neighborhood mixed use. If it's in a residential area and you have a vacant lot that's sold, at that point there, that developer can put it right on the property line. And that's a tight fit at that point.
I agree with that one. And the 600 square foot, I agree with that. I didn't even realize that was gone, but there are situations, I know, say a builder has some of these older buildings downtown and they purchase and they're putting apartments in, which is great. And I know in the past they have come to the zoning board and asked for whether it would be a variance or an exception if they had some apartments were 550 feet, 580 feet, which is fine. I understand that you can't have, everything can't be a perfect square footage, but as long as you know up front you have a minimum requirement, which I agree, and I believe we should have a minimum of 600 square feet per unit. So that is one of the first things I believe we'll all will discuss and work on that.
There's, as you said, Mr. Smurl, there's always room for a variance. We had a good example at our last meeting. Mr. Mamano came out the Harrison House. He's putting 20 one-bedroom units in there, but they're 670 square feet.
Yes.
I mean, our local developers know the game. They know that you can't put a 300-foot, 200-foot apartment in. You're not going to draw what you want in that building. The concern I have we're going to pack it in, they're become boarding houses for the most part, but it's going to open up.
That's the problem. They're going to be hotel room size apartments. That's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I don't want to see our large houses in our hill section or in Greenridge or any of the large houses. You see them cut up constantly, that we don't even know they're cut up, but at least if we have some rules and keep a minimum size, that would be a good.
I
And
agree,
in the
Sue. I
new
don't want to see a
code-
bunch of rooming houses in our neighborhoods. So I definitely agree with going back to the minimum, the 600 minimum.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an awful lot of rooming houses that exist in the city as it is.
Right.
They're under the radar. And I don't think it behooves the city to keep adding on to them, you know, and
I
again,
think one of the problems is, even if it's changed, which more than likely we will consider changing it back to 600, anyone presently is grandfathered in
Right.
under the existing zoning law, just so, but this would prevent future issues.
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns with the 1.5 parking spots per unit being reduced to 1?
Well,
While it's been mentioned.
I guess I do, and I'll say the board does, because there's not too many families that have one car. And if you're going to have a husband and wife, or even teenage children or adult children in with them, chances are you're going to have 2, 3, possibly 4 cars in that. So I think taking it down to 1 is lower it down too much, and you're going to push people into on-street parking, and you're going to create a problem.
I hate to get crazy with it, but can you go like 1 parking spot for 1 bedroom? That would be okay, but when we get into 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, maybe we can, you know, bring it back up to the 1.5 or even 2 for a 3 bedroom, you know.
Yeah.
I think a 1 bedroom.
I spoke earlier today with the zoning officer about that. He thought there was a little different reasoning, being it was easier to ask for, instead of 3.5 spots, it was easier to ask for 3. So that was the reasoning, and I thought that's what it was too, to make it easier than 1.5 spots per apartment, but we can certainly revisit that.
I think what Mr. Walsh just said, maybe looking at the bedroom, because in the ordinance itself, under bed and breakfast and stuff like that, they're calling out 1.1 per bedroom. So I don't think it's a bad idea in the future, looking at, as Mr. Walsh said, looking at the number of bedrooms in that apartment and tag your parking onto that. So if there's 4 bedrooms, maybe 2 spots or 3 spots.
Because people have to remember, too, when you have 2 or 3 cars in a family, if it's not a family unit, if there's just 3 people, 4 people in an apartment, they have a friend come over, each one. So now you're up to 8 cars versus 2 or 3 cars. It just multiplies the problem in a neighborhood.
Well, does it make sense just to go back to the 1.5 and then have whoever approaches, you know, at a meeting, get a special exception based on, you know, and based on that issue alone, instead of just making.
We've done that, Ms. McAndrew. We've offered variances up for
So
them.
that seems to, it did work, so I believe it would continue to work if that's how we put it in. or
I
made
agree.
that.
I agree.
Okay.
Yep. Let's move on to short-term rentals. All right. In the ordinance, it's called out 2 different ways, and I think it needs to be labeled either a short-term rental or a B&B, because it's either or. So I think that needs to look a little cleanup in the book itself. We had a case this past meeting where a family wanted to put into their home an Airbnb or a short-term rental. And some interesting facts or questions came up on it as far as how do you control who's coming into your neighborhood, if it's a family neighborhood. Because there is no check on Airbnb. I have used them. You have a credit card, you pay your bill, and you have the room or the house. And I think that's a major concern you're going to hear going forward throughout the whole city, like the areas where it is available, or if we give a special exception to someone, that there's no control over it. And it was brought up at them, are they registered? Is it registered as a business in the city, an Airbnb or a short-term rental? I own a property, I have to register in the city. If I have a rental property, we have to register the city. That should be no different at that point there. It's giving the city a little bit more control. I don't know how it sits now, if it's registered that way, but I don't think it is. But the concern you're going to have, and you're going to hear it shortly when the next one comes up, and it's permitted in a zone that does allow it, why is it allowed in my zone or my neighborhood and not over off of Kaiser Avenue or not over in Greenridge? Who determined that? Like, who determines what neighborhood can have an Airbnb or a short-term rental?
So, Mr. Gattens, when you apply for an Airbnb, is there an application? Do you have to come before zoning, or you can just open one up?
If it's permitted, you can open it up, as long as you meet the factors, which
If
is
it's
parking
permitted.
and stuff like that.
So, and naturally, there is no license. There is no, like the Radisson, they pay a hotel tax or whatever that entertainment tax is, or whatever it may be. So that wouldn't be in the zoning. That would be a separate ordinance in the
Right.
city to do that. But right now, how do we know they're insured? How do we know there's no license? There's no tracking of anything. So I could rent out my house and no one really knows because no one's tracking it, which isn't fair to anybody.
Well, the case that was before us, the family, they rented before, they came to us for permission, and they still have future bookings. So you're sort of stuck in the middle now. They're asking to do it, but they already have done it, and they're going to do it in the future.
I watched the meeting, and it was interesting. So, and I remember when they were throwing the name around, whether it's short-term rental or Airbnb, I don't know why. It's confusing, and it shouldn't be. So I believe we should just stick with one name moving forward. But I also was curious because I don't know what parts of the city they're allowed and why either. I mean, but when I watched the meeting, I was thinking, so who's in, so I'll be honest with you, initially I thought they all had to come before you, any Airbnb, right?
In the past.
I guess I'm
believe.
wrong.
In the past, before this ordinance.
All right, okay, so, well, I'm wrong, and that's okay to be wrong. But, so, moving forward, now, I don't know what parts of the city are allowed. I think they should all come before you guys. And also, because who's out there policing? It's not code enforcement checking on these properties to see if it's an Airbnb or not. It's not the police. So who's supposed to, police that or check on that to make sure they're following the ordinance or whatever we change in the ordinance? Or we
Mr.
just go out there to
McAndrew,
work?
I'd suggest maybe, as counsel, one thing I don't want to do is just make knee-jerk decisions. I want to listen to all your concerns here tonight, want to investigate them, look into them, compare them with maybe how other cities handle them, and in particular, the Airbnb situation. Because I'll tell you flat out, I use them too. I'm going to Portugal, and I'm staying in Airbnbs 6 nights. So, perhaps there's a classification for Airbnb. Perhaps there's a reason why something's called a short-term rental, because maybe seasonally somebody rents their place out. They go to the beach and they rent their house while they're at the beach, like things like that. So I just want to make sure that anything that we change, that it's well vetted, and that we put a lot of thought into it, and we consider, I know it's difficult to consider every aspect, everything that comes before you, because there's so many unique circumstances that come before your board. But the last thing I want to do is to every 2 or 3 months come up here and constantly changing the zoning laws. It took us forever to pass the existing one. And we did go around from neighborhood to neighborhood, and we met with the neighborhood associations and got input, and it took quite a long time, probably 2 years, at least before we ultimately passed it. And obviously, there were some things that were missed. It's a huge document. It's a huge area we're trying to cover. So we want to make sure that it's equitable. We want to make sure that it's fair. We want to make sure that we maintain neighborhoods so that, hey, we want people to be able to live. We want to create housing, but we also want to make sure that the housing is controlled in terms of registered, that there's rules surrounding the number of vehicles parked there, the sizes of these rentals, things such as this. So I think that it's a good idea that we do listen to all of your concerns. We take them down, we investigate them and look into, do our research, and then ultimately try to craft some of the changes that you're recommending to meet everybody's needs.
Sure.
I just want to add too, I also appreciate you coming tonight to discuss your concerns about the zoning ordinance. We could see what changes need to be made. I did just want to point out about the terminology, the Airbnb versus short-term rental. I believe short-term rental is more of a generalized term because there are other sites than Airbnb, like Verbo is one of them. There's different sites that people might be using to rent out their rooms as short-term. So I think that anything should be, more general if there are going to be others that other companies that we allow to operate within the city aside from just Airbnb.
So that one there might be taking a look at that definition. I think short-term rental is the owner has to occupy the residence for 6 months, and then the remainder of the time can be rented out. There was another piece. I mean, everything that I've heard so far, I was on the planning commission, and those were the documents that we used to make decisions. So I know how important those documents are. I know how important it is to have an accurate document to make decisions on. The apartment size, everything that's been mentioned has been, seems to be no-brainers to me. The amount of parking, those setbacks, these are ways to protect our neighborhoods and make them, keep those neighborhoods.
And I'll speak for the board. It's not that we're against Airbnbs or short-term rentals. I mean, I use it, just like you, Mr. King. But I can't speak for how Allentown does it, or Pittsburgh, or California, any place in California. But it's new in Scranton, and you're going to hear about it. We had cases about 3 years ago over on Electric Street that we had probably about 12 hours of testimony on it. And I think that was kind of the one that kicked the door open. They exist in the city now. I mean, they're in Harrison Avenue, there's a couple. I just want to get a level playing field, so when they do come before us, we have the right tool and the right verbiage that we need to go by to make a fair decision. Not everyone that comes before us is going, no, I mean, that case there didn't meet the requirements. They didn't live in the house for 6 months. I mean, she taught in Long Island, and she was gone by her own testimony 7.5 months. So their testimony shot them in the foot. That's what it came down to. So I think the other thing, Mr. Pinatar sent a couple things through, and they might have been touched on the same thing here. His concern in, let's get it on my phone, as you can see, was
I think one of them was how far from the area can you speak on a case? Before, it used to be 200 feet, which we thought was too little. We would give people some lenience with how far they are away from the property that we have in front of us. Now there's no limitation, so you can be from any part of the city, which might be too much.
Doesn't your board, I believe your board has, I'll ask our attorney too, don't you have the option to limit who can speak just by your judgment? Or would it
Correct.
be easier if you had a 300 square foot?
we went by it was called out in the old ordinance 200 feet from said property. So
Which
if we
was
went
not
on-
enough.
And there's times that, if they're a block away from that, we let them go for the sake of that argument sometimes, at that podium. Sometimes it's better off just to sit and listen for a couple minutes and appease the person instead of upsetting them. But right now, as Mr. Walsh said, in the second, well, I'm going to add on to a little bit, it should be called out to your resident of the city of Scranton, because right now it's open to anybody. So we can have a case coming up that's in Kaiser Valley, and somebody from Dunmore's coming down to speak on that case. But we feel it should be in the general neighborhood, even if it's 500 feet. I mean, it's not a lot of footage, 500 feet, so it can affect that property. But I think it needs to be cleared up a little bit and cleaned up at that point there.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to have an apartment building in Central City and then someone from the Hill section come over and say, well, I don't like that. So it's too difficult.
And it happens,
Yeah,
as you know.
and the meetings are long enough.
And we are lenient with the speakers. I mean, I think we were pretty lenient
Yeah.
for most of the people in that area. You know, we would kind of shut them down when they were from across town, but now in this ordinance, they can be from across town and come speak to us.
So I'm going to read Mr. Penatari's number 5. Protection of single-family residents is put in jeopardy by the new ordinance. The only district limited to single-family residents is the R6. All other districts allow two-family residents in townhouses, R8 and R10, and apartment buildings and conversion apartments, R9 and R11. This encourages owners of large single-family homes to add more residential units. I especially think of the large house in the Hill section and the Greenridge section. I don't think this is the intention of the new ordinance, and those sections need to be amended, in Mr. Pinatar's opinion. And I agree with that. A lot of people buy their homes in these areas because it's a single family, it's low density. And the ordinance is going to change that to where if you bought a house in a single area, and a good example is up going by upper south side before you get to Manuka, Campbell Street and Duncan Street, in that area up there, they're mostly single homes, and that ordinance is going to allow them homes to be broken up into 2 units and stuff. So I think it's something that needs to be looked into and talked about a little bit. As far as, there's a density change that's going to happen. I mean, it's naturally going to happen, but how tight do you want to make these neighborhoods? I mean, there's neighborhoods in Southside, you know, that are tight to begin with, and I can see that, like, you know, you're going to allow that. But back to that Airbnb the other night, they're all single homes over there on Roanoke Avenue. And I mean, we heard how they pay the highest taxes in the city. I mean, the typical what we hear, and they are high. And they bought in that area for that reason. And now, if that ordinance allows people to come in there and expand their homes and build a double on a lot, you know, God forbid a house burned down, now they buy that lot and they can put an apartment building on that lot. It's changing the complexion of that neighborhood completely.
Or a few apartments under 500 feet minimum.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Gattens, this is something, there's a lot more detail than we can discuss this evening.
Yeah.
So we are going to need to, maybe we'll form a committee here, 1 or 2 of us, and meet with you a few more times and go over a lot of these details, because there are a lot of smaller things too that are included in here. And I understand what the people are saying. You know, we bought our house up here because they're single families. So, and now the new zoning says you could put 3 in the same spot, which isn't fair. But not only isn't it fair there, but maybe I didn't pay $300,000 for my house, but I'd also like the same consideration. So, you know, I don't really care how much you paid.
Oh, I know.
It's kind of like, well, I think it should be fair for everyone, not just because you paid more money. It shouldn't be allowed in any basic residential section.
So I just think them 3 areas that I called out, or even Mr. Pinatar called out in the ordinance, maybe just take a good look at them, what's allowed in there and what can happen in there. And one last, I don't have anything else, just one more thing. Back in January, I requested on behalf of the board that we have a policeman at our meetings, and it still has not happened. And we have some meetings that are a little contentious at the outcome of the meeting, because you have the applicant and the neighbor. One was going home mad, and sometimes it gets heated. And I'm at the point right now, if I show up the next meeting and there's no policeman here, I will not be participating in that meeting anymore.
So, Mr. Gattens, I formally requested one, and I was assured that you would have an officer. So you haven't had any at all?
No.
Not one? And that request went right to the mayor. Well, we'll just have to circle on and send that request again, or ask what's up with that. But I watched the past, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 meetings, and I'm thrilled and glad that you guys came with the issues, because what I saw during these meetings was confusion, a lot of confusion. Whether it was a resident, whether it was between you guys, with no disrespect, but in Mr. Pinatar, because it is a new ordinance, and it's, you know, I mean, I can't answer a lot of questions. regarding the ordinance because it's just massive and there's a lot of content. But the first step is to clarifying things. And I appreciate you guys coming and bringing, this forward to us so we can take a look at it.
And if you look at the old book that we had, there was numerous addendums into that, and that's what happens. We knew it was going to happen, and I'll be honest with you, the problem I have with this book here is we didn't get this until March. We didn't have the new ordinance in our hand to work with or even see it. So we were left hanging. I mean, we got a binder now with it in, and hopefully after we make changes down the road, we'll get a regular book given to us and everything. But I was very disappointed in the handling of that the zoning board for the city of Scranton didn't have the tool to make the right decision. And maybe it's their first 3 months, we didn't make the right decision because we were flying off the old ordinance. So we'll see what happens.
I agree, Mr. Gattens. Now, for the future, are you okay with the way your books are right now?
Yes.
Because we were going to have the new books printed and bound, but with this happening now, this may be another 2 months out before we complete everything. I believe if we make any changes, it may have to go back to the planning board or the planning commission.
We're good with it. This is fine.
definitely.
You know,
Fine.
because
And then once we make the changes, if we make changes, then we could have them all at once, instead of keep adding into the book.
Yeah.
It would be just probably 8 weeks away from where we are,
Yeah.
as long as we keep moving on it.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's
as long
fine.
as you have a book to work on. I know you had just a stack of papers one day, and it wasn't good, so.
And I think nothing's cut and dry,
Yeah.
because, we talk here week after week about the housing issue in Scranton, lack of housing. So that's part of the challenge. If we want to eliminate and change all those zoning ordinances, you eliminate the ability for there to be housing, since we have a large lack of housing. So it's going to be a balance. We have to try to figure something out that works for all the citizens of Scranton, so.
And one thing we like to say is there's good progress and there's bad progress in the city of Scranton. And some of the developers that come in from outside the area, not all of them, but some of them, when you kind of tiptoe around and question their rents that are $1,500, $1,600 a month, that's not helping low rent, what they're doing. They're coming in here, developing these properties, and not take care of it. They're shoving as many people in that house as they can. So there's a gray area that the city really has to watch. And hopefully, through this and everything, we can get a better handle on what's happening.
So I'd like to also say I'm glad that you guys were able to come in and express some of your concerns. I attended some of those meetings. I had to watch you guys in the moment try to interpret, what was unclear. I saw the assistant city planner come up and explain something, and he didn't even have it right because he didn't know the ordinance. And I could imagine the frustration that all of you guys feel. I'm sorry that the books are going to be printed a little bit later. It was my
That's fine.
request that we held off on those until after we had this meeting at least. Like I said before, a lot of these seem to be common sense to me. It helps with a lot of decisions. Do you feel like what we discussed tonight kind of goes right across the board with all of the zoning, and that these few things that we have here could address most of what comes in front of you, or do you feel like there's other sections that we are also going to need to address?
These are the main things, especially the square footage of apartment parking. That's the two things with the variance that we hear all the time. We tell them you have to have so many spots and you have to have so many square feet. Again, the developers, the Don Amanos, the Charlie Jeffersons and Basilica, they all know that. They don't come anything else. It's more outside the area developers with apartment houses in older homes and stuff like that. So I think that's where the grip has to be more tighter, come up with a number, and that's what we stick by with that. But they're the two main things that we deal with.
Right.
Correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of the things that come before you are in the same realm or in the same ballpark. So these things you do feel if they were adjusted, you could make most of the decisions across the board.
Definitely.
I think so, but I think there's going to be some more to come. I don't think it's all come in front of us. We have not been able to read this whole book front to back. I'm sure there's stuff that we don't know yet.
So at this point, is this most of the things that have come in front of you that there was
Yes.
questions or gray areas on?
Definitely.
Yeah,
We're going to see changes when we get to a special exception. And that's what the short-term rental was, a special exception. But take them out of the picture altogether, but there's other things that will come before us with special exception that we're going to have to really look at detail and make sure that it's covered the right way in the book as well, and that it's not a gray area, it's a black and white area.
All right, for notification, I've heard a lot of questions on what neighbors are notified. Are we still posting it on telephone poles? I know it's advertised in the paper and it's done on the city's website and stuff, but it seems our paper gets smaller, and mine gets smaller every day. So how long before we don't even advertise in the paper? So do we have suggestions on how many neighbors should be notified, who should be notified, and how do we notify the entire neighborhood of things like that?
I think the neighbors used to get a letter within 200 feet, I believe it was 200 feet, but it's left up to the property owner that's coming in front of us. They write down the neighbors, and the letter would go out to whoever they wrote down. So if they didn't want to write down the neighbor they didn't like next to them, they wouldn't get a letter. It's not something the city kind of took control of, but now in this new ordinance, there's no letters, no more letters. So now it's just the paper and the poles. And when we're out driving around looking at these properties, a lot of times the pole signs are ripped down.
So do you feel that we need to go back to that?
I think 100%, and I think they should be a little more than the 200 feet, to be honest with you, because I don't think it was enough, because most people don't understand that it's coming in front of them.
And to add on to what Mr. Walsh said, we've been getting applications that are incomplete, where that section, as he called out, there's an area in that application for 5 names and 5 addresses we put on, and it's blank. At that point there, the zoning officer give back to him and fill out the right way, finish it. It shouldn't be on Mr. King or Abraham, his assistant, to have to Google everything and get that. It's up to the applicant to take care of that. And it states right on, if the application's not complete, it's going to be returned to you. And I think for us, we're going to have to start doing it at the meeting. If it's not complete, and we're not trying to insult Dan or Abraham or anything like that, but if it's not complete, we're just not going to hear it anymore.
We're having incomplete property owner names, addresses, who lives at the property, what they are exactly doing, which should be on the application
I
itself.
am glad that you guys brought that up. That one meeting I came to, I felt like every piece that came in front of you had an incomplete application.
I think there's 4 out of 5
Yep.
that were like a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, the one in particular, it didn't have any of the neighbors listed. My mother was one of the neighbors that was listed. She's well within 200 feet of the property. Other than word of mouth throughout the neighborhood is how she found out it was occurring. I found out later, the second time after a continuance, some neighbors did get letters, so I don't know what happened the first time around. But it also, now it gets me into continuances. I noticed that one of the meetings I came to, you might have had 4 out of 5, that the individual who applied didn't show up.
Yep.
And I know back in 2011, 2013, if you didn't show up, it was dismissed. And that's not the case anymore. Is that something that you think you're going to go back to, or is it something
I think we should go back to it.
Is there a reason why it's not occurring?
I think Mr. Penatar kind of
I think-
he took control. They would give him a shot to come back at the next meeting,
Yeah.
which is not fair to the residents that take their time to come here and then have to come
The
again.
meeting that I was at, I feel like there was like 7 or 8 families that may have came to that meeting, and it got continued.
Yeah.
So now those families all have to come back the following month, and the onus should be on the person that's applying.
Yeah. And it happened a couple. We just had one this past meeting, the same thing. First case didn't show up. No, and I think maybe that's where we have to get stronger as the board, too. I'm not going to push it off on.
Yeah, I believe the board
I think
has the
they're-
right.
Yeah, we'll just say,
To vote.
that's
Bob,
it.
that'll shorten your meetings real quick. If the application's not complete, just send them on their way.
Yeah, yep.
Another issue we have is you may have the applicant, but they'll bring a contractor or an electrician in their place. They have no answers to our questions.
Yeah.
And
So if they're not a legal representative, they don't own
well,
the property?
they'll say, so-and-so is away on business. I'm his contractor. I'm his electrician. Tell us about your project. He doesn't know.
Yeah, I don't see how that works, because if you are not the actual owner of the project, you have no standing. So how could someone else come in and do that? I believe, and this is, I know it's been done in the past, because I've been at meetings where it's been, you're not the owner, and unless you can prove you're the owner, you have no stand. You can't come here and ask for something that you don't own. So
I think what you're facing, you'll have attorneys writing affidavits that say they're legally able to represent the owner. I'm
Right.
sure there's your loophole on that one probably, but
We'll let them come with it. I mean, if they have it, that's fine, But as Mr. McDermott stated, half the time it's somebody that maybe pulled a permit and that's it. And we're asking about the square footage of the building. We're asking about the setbacks that they have or where they intend to put the off-street parking. It's, I don't know, so. And that almost falls back on us too. I mean, I think we need to get stronger as long as we have the support behind us to push that decision. And I think going forward, coming out here tonight, that part you'll see change as far as the applications and everything, because either do it right or don't come before us. I mean,
So do you want to still depend on the homeowner for putting down the residents that want
Yes.
to be notified?
Yes.
Because we do have programs and we have software and stuff that we can actually go on and tell you who owns the properties within the whole thing. Is that something that our administration should check on that application before?
I think if it's in black and white, in large print on that application, the application has to be filled out entirely. Then it falls back on the applicant to make sure it's filled out entirely. And I understand this, we run into a lot of language barriers in here, and I get that. So if they contact Mr. King or Mr. Negron and explain the situation, then at that point, maybe help can be offered. But that's 10% of the cases that we have.
if your agenda's posted like 24 hours before the meeting, what you can maybe do is require them, to indicate, number one, are they going to be present at that meeting?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 days before, 48 hours before the meeting. And, is a review of the application 48 hours before the meeting. And if the application's not fully completed, they just don't put it on the agenda.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, in all fairness, I would think that's the groundwork that should be laid before it comes in front of you.
Yeah.
And that, to speak to Mr. Schuster's concern, that saves 6, 7, 8 neighbors showing up here, wasting their time.
Yeah.
It saves the applicant who didn't take the time to get all these signatures and fill it out properly, and it saves all of your time sitting up here. You have 5 different applicants, and 4 of them haven't filled out the paperwork. Well, it's just a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, correct. We're good.
All right, anyone else? Good? Gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
We will stay in contact because we have to
Thank you.
have a lot more to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.